They are the Black Templars, the fanatical sons of Sigismund, the first High Marshal and the Emperor's most zealous champion. Forged in fire and bound by oaths older than the Imperium itself, they are more than a chapter. They are a crusade eternal. Unlike their brother Astartes, the Black Templars do not sit idle in fortress monasteries. They do not wait for war to find them. They bring the Emperor's wrath to the Xenos, to the heretic, to the mutant across the stars. Clad in black, bearing the sigil of the Templar cross, each warrior is a living weapon, driven not by duty, but by faith. A faith that burns so bright it scorches everything unworthy in its path.
This is Midwinter Minis, my name's Guy. This video has been sponsored by Squarespace, and I'm quite excited for this one. Not only am I going to show you how to simply paint great looking Black Templars pretty efficiently, I'm going to show you how to customize and paint really battle-worn Space Marines too. To show you how, let's crack open the most basic Space Marine box you can get, Intercessors, and have some fun with them. This box comes with duplicate sprues, so instead of building options, I can basically make two identically posed Space Marines and make one look really war-torn. The unique biology, enhancements, training, and armor of the Space Marines in the universe of Warhammer 40k give them a pretty unique advantage on the battlefield. They can just keep fighting. In various points of the lore, some Space Marines have been forced into weeks and sometimes months-long engagements with no chance of repair or resupply. Some good examples: in No Fear, after the betrayal at Calth, the Ultramarines are forced into brutal underground war, surviving for months in irradiated tunnels. During the Siege of Terra, Space Marines from different chapters fight in rotating shifts on the walls of the palace for months with minimal rest. And finally, probably my favourite example, the Beast Arises, where Astartes are engaged in boarding actions and sieges that last for days and weeks, fighting to the bitter end with scavenged weapons and broken armour. Okay, so there we go, that's the first Marine built. Just your basics. Now, if you were building your Astartes for the first time, this is probably how they'd look. Let's complete the vanilla version with a simple coat of Stirland Battlemire texture paint on the base, and there he is, Brother Milquetoast. Now, I'm not going to lie, that was a pretty fun model to build, but to me, as someone who grew up with the darker, grittier imagery of 40k in the 90s, this feels like the daytime TV version of an Astartes. So let's use the duplicate sprue to build the same model, but this time we're going to go all out, making this Marine look like he's really been through the meat grinder. So first bit of easy upgrading, let's get that barrel drilled out. Carefully mark out the center of the barrel with the tip of your hobby knife. Now, you can either bore out the rest just by twirling the tip of the knife round and round on that point, but you can break your blade that way. The most common option is to use a pin vise with a 1.5mm drill bit, but I'm going to use an electric version because I am lazy. This thing is called a wow stick, and it's really useful if you've got loads of guns to drill out rather than doing each one by hand. I also like to drill out the muzzle breaks at the side of the barrel too, and then you can see the light shining through, which makes it look a bit fancy, you know? And while we've got the drill out, we can also start lightly boring the tip into some key points on the armour, imagining where the Marine has been hit by some pretty high-powered rounds. They're generally going to be facing the direction of the fight, so focusing mostly on the front-facing parts of the armour. I'm also going to do a bit of visual storytelling here. This guy was on the receiving end of a heavy burst of fire that climbed up his chest and struck his helmet, damaging it so much it disabled some of its systems, so now he only wears it when the risk of damage outweighs the danger of essentially fighting blind. So let's snip off the neck part and glue this helmet as if it's been maglocked to his hip, just like the sergeants do. Some penetrating shots on the side of the pauldron, and a deep cut caused by a glancing hit. Now, just a personal preference here, I way prefer the curved magazines of the old bolt guns, so I'm going to go for the more classic look on this battle-worn Marine. No scope though, not yet anyway. Now, Astartes aren't slouches when it comes to a fistfight. Getting up close with deadly melee-focused enemies is just another day in the office for them, so let's use the tip of the hobby blade to run some subtle and not so subtle scratches and lacerations onto some of the more prominent armour plates, especially stuff like the pauldrons. And just be careful you don't battle damage yourself in the process. Whoops. Please click the link that just popped up to watch my video about knife safety and how cutting away from you is for kids. Okay, let's glue this model together, matching the pose of the previous Marine we had, but this time let's give it a mean looking head. Now, it might seem obvious, but one of the keys to making your Space Marine look awesome is actually using the optional extras you get in the kits. For example, all intercessors are equipped with a bolt pistol too, so get that holster pistol glued on. Let's also spice this dude up by maglocking that scope we removed from the curved magazine part onto his butt. And now, as I'm doing these guys as Black Templars, an important aspect to consider is adding chain somewhere on the model. This has significance to the Black Templars in particular because chaining their weapons to themselves is a sort of ritual act of penance and devotion, a vow to never retreat or relinquish their arms. So using some 2mm chain, which is maybe a little bit too big but it looks quite cool, I snipped off a couple of links to attach to the front of the bolter, looking like it's tucked under the hand, secured the edges in place with a dot of superglue. I then did the same on the other side, but with a longer length of chain, and used my hobby knife to guide the glued ends to the places I want them to fix to. The last couple of regular Space Marine kits have only come with enough purity seals to give 1 per Marine, or maybe 2 if you're a special boy, so I raided my spares box for some extras, as well as one of the relics from the new kit too. If you don't have spares, ask someone who's been playing an Imperial faction for a while, and they'll probably have loads of spare bits you could buy, trade or borrow. Now, there's no hard and fast rule as to where these things go, just try not to attach them to places where they look like they'd obviously get in the way. Speaking of asking friends for stuff, if you've got a regular pal who you play against, ask them for a few build option spares. Cut them up and add them as debris to your bases, a surefire way to assert dominance in your next game. Superglue and sprinkled on baking soda really help cement those bits down and also add some trodden in dirt around the edges. I also added some small stones too, before using the same texture paint we used on the basic Marine. Now before we glue down the model, let's water down some of that texture paint and add it to the areas that might get caked up with dirt and grime from days and days of fighting. And then let's glue him down. So just a quick reminder, this is the basic dude, fresh off the drop pod. And this is the same Marine, days into a deployment, countless enemies eliminated, tired, dirty, damaged, but not broken. Now, these models are going to be Black Templars, so black primer is an obvious choice. Now let's just grab this from my handy dandy overdoor shoe rack that hilariously exactly fits spray paints. Just a tenner too, link in the description. This is something that I featured in my recent video about really cool things I have in my studio that if I had to start all over again, I would repurchase straight away. And I thought, you know what, that would also be a really useful resource to put on midwinterminis.com, my website that I created and host using Squarespace. So yeah, I did exactly that. And it doesn't just look like a rubbish list website that I would have made using GeoCities or Microsoft Front Page back in the day. It's fancy, looks aesthetically pleasing, and was ridiculously fast to put together. I'm absolutely not a web design or coding expert, but Squarespace puts so many tools right in my fingertips that I can create a website that suits my needs and looks great. I've even built a web store where I can sell channel merch. It just makes everything so user-friendly. Whether you've got a creative passion you want to show the world or a side project that you're ready to turn into something more, I can genuinely recommend Squarespace. It's what I've used and it just works. Hit the link in the description, squarespace.com/midwinterminis, and give their super simple site builder a go. Play around, see what you come up with, and when you're ready to take it live, you can get 10% off your first website or domain by using the code midwinterminis at checkout. That's squarespace.com/midwinterminis. Okay, so these models are primed black, but instead of spraying more and more, I gave them a couple of very light coats and then painted on some slightly thinned black paint into the recesses just to make sure all of those nooks and crannies are black too. Now, my favourite cheaty way of painting black armour is to do a very light dry brush with some mid-grey. Not too bright, not too dark, something like this, or Mechanica Standard Grey would work great too. Get a bit of paint on a big flat or round brush, wipe away nearly all of the paint until nothing comes off, and then softly brush against the model. All these cool textures and edges will be caught, but the recesses will stay black. It's nice to see all those textures that I added to the war-torn Marine really come out. Now, obviously these do look a little bit light right now, more like dark grey armour, but don't worry, we'll darken them down later. Before that though, let's sort out the rest of the base coats. Black Templars have a pretty simple colour palette, very beginner friendly. You're going to need a brass colour to paint the chest aquillas, a small base coat brush here, I think this is a size 2, just a cheap synthetic thing, you don't need to get fancy, just try to avoid the back of the bolter when you're painting this part, but if you do, just repaint it black. Let's also paint the little relic box with brass too. And now you're going to want a silver or a gunmetal paint. And using this, we're going to base coat some of the metallic elements like the chain, obviously, the back end of the bolter, the magazine, and the muzzle and sights, or whatever the extra bits are on the front. Let's do these little dot things too on the arm. I don't really know what they are, but they look like they'd be fun to press, you know, like chunky old buttons on a tape deck. If you can be bothered, you can also paint the harnesses on the back gunmetal too, but definitely do the side vents and the circular backplate and the top vents under each armor plate on the power pack. Any bare-headed Marines could have their Robocop collars and earmuffs painted silver too. The middle of the scope? Sure. Okay. Next color, a nice, bold, bloody red. First off, most obvious, if you've got any purity seals, the wax of the purity seals, get that base coated. We're also going to do the housing of the bolter, basically any bits that you didn't just paint silver. And with as small a brush as you can muster, let's base coat the eye lenses too. Now we're going to want to swap out to a bright, warm off-white. Something like this pale sand would be perfect, and what we're going to do here is base coat the inner part of the pauldrons. And also the parchment of the purity seals as well, and I'll be painting the relic bones of this fancy marine too. I thinned this quite a lot because I don't want it to look chunky, but we're definitely going to need a second coat on some areas, especially the pauldrons, to get them looking nice and smooth. Okie dokes, if you have gone with any bare-headed marines, you'll also want to give them a base coat with whatever skin tone you prefer. I'm going with this Cadian flesh tone for my grizzled lad. And after that, that's your base coats done essentially. Now we're going to create a custom wash that we can apply to the whole model that'll work with all of the colours, and this is going to darken the recesses and mute all of those colours a little bit too. We're going to mix black wash, brown wash, and some Lamian medium in pretty much equal parts. You can swap out the Lamian medium for a regular acrylic medium, diluted with some water. You still want it to have that very fluid consistency. And now just slop it on all over every part of the model. Wick away the excess so it doesn't pool, and after you've done that, that'll take about 20 minutes or so to dry, so give yourself a break, have a coffee, pet your pooch, go for a walk or something, and then once you're back in your nerd dungeon, grab a nice earth tone muddy brown and base coat the bases. Now, if you're wanting your marines to look extra dirty and grimy, dilute a tiny bit of the base colour with about 5 times as much water so that the paint starts to break down and sort of separate and become very transparent, and then paint this onto the boots, the knees, legs, well, anywhere you want to look really grimy. And after that's dried, you can add another layer if you want to really cake on the effect. The key though is to keep that brown stain really, really thin, so that way it'll creep into the recesses and give that dusty look when it's dried. Now, to add a bit of brightness back to the pauldrons, I'm going to sponge on some of that original off-white we base coated with. If you don't want to have to pinch a tiny bit of sponge in your fingers, you can flip your brush around, use the little brush protector tube it came with, and shove a bit of sponge up in it. Cool, huh? Dabby, dabby, dabby. Make sure there's not too much paint left on the sponge, and then stipple it onto the face of the pauldron. You see how it's making that cool, natural sort of noise pattern? It's way, way easier than trying to achieve that with a brush. Now with the same colour and a detail brush, I'm going to give the prominent parts of any of the parchment a little highlight too. And same story with the red, just go back to the original base coat colour and add a few light touches here and there, brightening up the now darkened down base coat. If you want to brave scrawling some tiny text on the purity seals, my best advice is to get the paint consistency right first. I like mixing a tiny dot of black paint into some black or brown wash, and that way it flows ridiculously easy, but it's slightly transparent too. You don't really want heavy black lines. Draw your brush along your palette until almost nothing comes off, and then just carefully tippy-tap in straight lines as if you were writing punishment lines on a tiny whiteboard. Honestly, I'm not going to lie to you, this is a learned skill. It took me ages to be able to do this well, and I don't think I'm even particularly good at it. So just practice when you can, and you'll be able to do it too. Don't be put off, just keep trying, and you'll get better every time. Now, cheekily, the transfer sheet in this new box doesn't really come with any Black Templar stuff, but most of the old Space Marine transfer sheets do. So I found one and I cut off 4 Templar crosses, one for each pauldron. Black Templars have that on both shoulders. They don't have battle roll insignia on their right pauldrons like most chapters do. To make them conform really nicely to a curvy surface, I'll also cut right into the inner edges with my knife to allow each flap to flex around the curve. I'll also chop out some little number 4 numerals for each knee too. Let's moisten them up. And while we wait for them to detach from the back paper, I'm going to add a little coat of microset to the areas on the model where the transfers will be going, and this should help set the decal in place. Okay, cool, let's get these on. I tend to lift the transfers onto the model with a brush and then use the tip of a hobby knife to very gently push them around into the right position, being careful not to scratch the paint job. The Templar crosses will be a bit fragile though, as I cut right into them, so I got the paper really close to the model before sliding the transfer off onto the pauldrons, and then using the knife again to get them in place. And yep, that one actually broke a bit, so no worries, I'll just get it in place, and then I'll paint over the tiny gap when it's secured on. Now, to get the transfers to really conform to the surface, remove any wrinkles, and start revealing the texture underneath the transfer on the battle-damaged pauldrons, I dipped a cotton bud into some microsol, which softens the transfers and makes them do all the things that I just said. And to seal them in place and knock off the shine from the transfers, I applied a couple of coats of Lamia Medium. Nice, they look painted on now, which is ideal. Now let's fix that crack with some black paint. Awesome. Now for the battle damage marine, I'll do the same sponge stippling trick, but this time over the transfers so it looks like the base coat colour is showing through the scratched paint of the insignia. And then a few careful off-white lines with a brush following any lacerations on the armour plates. Let's make his face look a bit more lively, simply lightening up the original flesh tone with a tiny touch of off-white. I then highlighted the brows, forehead, nose, and the top of his head too. To give him that soldiery buzz cut look, I mixed some mid-grey paint with brown wash to make a kind of warm grey glaze, and stippled that onto the top of his head, coming back with the flesh highlight colour again I just used to cut back into the brow line to make it extra sharp. If you want to get real fancy, we can mix some yellow into our base coat red colour to create a nice highlight for the eye lenses, using a detail brush to place our orangey highlights towards the front centre of each lens. By adding a little more yellow and highlighting progressively smaller areas until you're basically just adding a fiery dot of pure yellow towards the front of the lens. A fun fact, did you know that power packs on Space Marines are supposed to be miniaturized nuclear fusion reactors? Let's make them look the part with some hot heat coming out of those vents. So first a base coat on the inner vent areas with our blood red, and then we're going to add a couple of very thin layers of yellow paint that's been heavily diluted with water. Can you see it running into the vent cracks? That's exactly what we want. You can then go back with your blood red to kind of gently dry brush the vents, moving a small brush from the inner edge to the outer edge, just trying to catch those lines. One of the final steps is kind of optional, but if you want to bring back a shine to any of the metallic parts, go back to your original base coat colour and give any sharp or prominent areas a little touch. On the damaged marine, I also popped a bit of silver into any of the really deep bullet holes on the armour plates too. Let's do a quick dry brush with some off-white to bring out the texture on the bases, and then a coat of brown wash to muddy up and soften the dry brush effect, and then let's just black rim the bases and call them done. Hopefully this has shown you how simple it is to not only paint up your Black Templars in an efficient, time-saving, but still very visually striking way, but also how to give your army of power-armoured super soldiers a battle-worn, gritty look too. It's easy to forget that 5-turn games of Warhammer 40k aren't supposed to be an entire conflict played out on the tabletop. They're like a little simulated snapshot of a conflict. What takes a couple of hours to play out in-game would only represent about 30 or 40 seconds of in-universe action. There's absolutely no shame in fielding a pristine Space Marine, but in my mind it's cool to visually represent how relentless and indomitable they are in the lore. A full day of fierce, non-stop fighting is pretty common for these super soldiers. Now consider that there are 1,440 minutes in a day, and that a 5-turn game of 40k simulates about half a minute. So you're looking at about 2,500 to 3,000 games of 40k playing out during your average big battle. That's what I'm trying to visually simulate here. A tenacious Marine at the start of a battle and at the end. Battered, damaged, but in the same defiant pose, ready for more. Now, if you want to own these minis, I'm actually collaborating with a few friends and donating them to an auction to raise money for Mind, the mental health charity. If you fancy winning them, keep an eye out for my posts here on YouTube and also on Instagram. I'll let you know as soon as the auction goes live. Now, if you are new to this and thought Space Marines were just kind of regular dudes in cool armor and a bit surprised to find out that they're actually indoctrinated child soldiers who get transformed into drugged up superhuman space monk killing machines who only stop when they die, you might want to check out this video I made where I talk about the implants they receive, how their physiology works, and what they might actually look like based on all these massive traumatic procedures they endure. It's not pretty though. Right, bear with me for just a second because I'd like to extend my thanks to a few people. First off, to our amazing army of supporters on Patreon. Without their support, I simply wouldn't be able to make videos like this for everyone to enjoy as my actual job. They're awesome, they've changed my life, and I can't thank them enough. If you want to join them, you can from just £2 a month at the link in the description. New signups also get transformed into sausage chunks as a sacrifice to the Great Devourer, my dog, Nessa. Oh, just 6 this week, Nessa Bess. Well, you better catch them all. You feeling up to it? Oh, I like the confidence. All right, this is from Original Peter, James, the Almighty Padfoot, Lil, Emily, and I am Spartacus. 5 for 6, pretty good. Another huge thanks to this video's sponsor. Don't forget to check out squarespace.com/midwinterminis for 10% off a website or domain with my code. And finally, thank you for watching. You're awesome. And I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.